Vengeful, Chapter 1, Of Shadows and Doubts. Within the inky black night, a forlorn train whistle sounded as a solitary car sped down a billowing dirt road. Engine roaring, the tires sliding loose gravel in the vehicle's wake as it raced ever closer to the flashing railroad crossing. Tires skidded to a violent stop within a swirling cloud of dust, inches before smashing through the lowering barrier. In panic, Luke Bolton, 35, athletic, handsome, wearing a crisp white shirt, tie, and faded jeans, leapt out of his car. Heart racing as his chestnut brown eyes searched the miles of steel rails that stretched in both directions. Voice strained, Luke called out, "Emily! Emily!" As if in answer to his appeal, another long whistle wailed from the locomotive to the east. Desperate, Luke ran a shaky hand through his ink-black hair as he scanned the tracks to the west. Swallowing hard, Luke stilled as he spotted a lone silhouette, her willowy frame bathed in dim moonlight, about a quarter mile down the track, standing on the rusty rails. Oh, God. Car forgotten, Luke bolted in the direction of the young woman. Racing along the man-made hill jutting up from the desert floor, Luke fought his way through the sage, tumbleweeds, and dry prairie grasses that grew several feet below the steel pathways that ran across the barren, flat landscape of southeast New Mexico. Luke sprinted toward Emily Marquez, a petite young college student days away from celebrating her 20th birthday. Fighting for air, Luke called out, "Emily!" The young woman had to have seen him, had to hear him calling her name. Yet Emily remained stoic, her feet planted firmly upon the wooden beam that secured the two iron rails to either side of her well-worn tennis shoes. Luke's mind raced. Doesn't Emily realize that she is in the path of the oncoming train? Quaking beneath him, the ground shuddered as the heavy engine closed in. Caught in the wide circle of the locomotive's blinding spotlight, Luke fought to gain more speed as he pushed his wounded body past its limit in his frantic attempt to reach Emily first. At the base of the hill just below Emily, Luke stumbled to a stop and reached out to her. "Take my hand, Emily, please." Emily ignored his plea. Desperate, Luke scrambled up the embankment, his hands clawing at the loose soil, fighting for traction among the jolting earth. He had lost so much already. It was inconceivable to lose anything or anyone else. "For God's sake, Emily, don't do this," Luke pleaded. Crumbling, the ground beneath Luke's feet caved in, sending him back down the levee. Luke's desperate eyes fixed on Emily as he battled to regain his upward momentum. Resolved, Emily turned sad eyes upon Luke and offered him a faltering smile. "It's okay, Mr. Bolton. This is how I make things right." Tremors rocked Emily's small frame as the deafening roar intensified. Head held high, she straightened, set her gaze upon the intense, blinding light, then sealed her fate. Teeth clenched, Luke's body coiled as he launched himself at Emily. Within seconds of his feet leaving the dry earth, Luke felt a hot spray of Emily's blood splash across his startled face. Luke's mind screamed in denial as the sickening thud of his student's body being struck assaulted his ears. Arms flailing, Luke was blasted back and away from tracks. His body caught within tempestuous winds triggered by the explosive passing of the train. Then came the sound of metal on metal, grinding and squealing as the engineer engaged the brakes. The last thing Luke saw were brilliant golden embers that danced within the still of the night, sparked by the restraints of the locomotive as they clung to the cold, heartless rails. Navy curtains stirred as Luke fought to wake from the nightmare he was trapped within. First balled within the tangled covers, Luke thrashed about as a low, tortured moan escaped him. "Emily." Frantic, Luke thundered awake. His eyes searched the dark interior of his room and found it empty. Resting a shaky hand on his chest, Luke attempted to still his pounding heart. Like so many nights before, Luke had woken from a horrifying image of his student's death. Soaked in sweat, breath labored, his soul heavy with unrelenting grief and loss. Sleep forgotten, Luke tossed the covers aside, swung his legs around, and planted both of his feet onto the cold tile floor. Absent-mindedly, Luke ran a still-shaking hand down the white scars that ran like faded spiderwebs across his collarbone, shoulder, and down his chest. "I'm fine," Luke's sounded gruff but calm. "Yes, I'm sure. I just need a minute." Standing, Luke shook off the remnants of the nightmare, turned on the light, and grimaced as his eyes fixed upon the calendar, adorned with the beautiful mountain scene, pinned close to the light switch. Jaw clenched, Luke took note of the large red circle that encompassed May 10th. Luke angrily snatched the calendar, ripped it down, and tossed it onto the far wall. "Really? You thought I'd forget?" Luke growled. Rubbing the back of his neck, he glared at the walls of his empty room. How desperately he wished that he could forget today and all that it reminded him of. Unfortunately, like so many other things that haunted him, that tragic day at the university last year had changed his life, and him, irrevocably. Taking note of the alarm clock, Luke ran a hand down his unshaven face. It was 4:30 a.m., 3.5 hours until he needed to be at work. His eyes drifted to the discarded prescription drugs on his nightstand. A soft breeze sent the curtains by the bed hovering above the bottle of pills. Lips pressed into a thin line, Luke growled, "Screw it. I don't need 'em." Walking into the bathroom, Luke flipped on the light and marched over to the tub, yanked the shower curtain aside, and spun the faucet on. Cold water sputtered out of the tap. Knowing it'd take a few minutes for it to warm up, Luke reached over to grab a towel and spotted his reflection in the mirror. The short burst of courage he felt moments ago quickly faded as he stared back at himself. Eyes that had once been happy and warm now appeared vacant, haunted, and empty. Today marked the first anniversary of the mass shooting that had traumatized him and his school. More than ever, Luke wanted to stay inside, lock the doors, and pretend, if only for a moment, that it was just like any other college professor at any other school on a normal, uneventful day. But unfortunately for him, there was nowhere to hide, no place to go where the questions of the faculty, students, and media would not follow if he did not attend today's memorial service. Hot steam rose from the tub, fogging up the bathroom. Luke did not need a special day to remember the victims of the mass shooting, nor did he need a moment of silence to reflect upon the events that damn near ended his life when he had stood between the gunman and his terrified students in his feeble attempt to protect them. Stepping into the shower, Luke allowed the hot water to wash over his 6'1" frame. Even after all this time, nightmares were not the only thing that haunted him. Every time someone ran into the classroom late, slammed a door, or came up behind him unannounced, he had to fight off the urge to jump out of his own skin. Worse still, after months of psychological therapy, he continued to see Emily everywhere he turned. The therapist Luke had seen assured him the unwanted reaction was normal and that it would fade with the passing of time. But it had not. And how could it? Luke saved Emily's life, risking his own, just to watch her take her own life 5 short months later. Frustrated, Luke spun the handle, shut off the water, and stepped out of the tub. Still angry, he rubbed his face dry and then began toweling off his body in short, forceful strokes. It pained Luke to know there would be no help in the sessions he was forced to attend, nor could he find a reprieve from this constant gut-wrenching pain. At least not yet, anyway. For now, there was only the job, his students, the daily task he busied himself with, and... Luke looked into the mirror and shook his head. And did not matter. Luke needed to suck it up and keep things together until he somehow managed to come out of the other side of this. Steam continued to roll out of the empty shower and fog up the glass. Reaching out, Luke started to wipe away the condensation with his hand and paused in midair. In thick, bold lines, writing appeared on the fog surface. No peace. No peace. No peace. Luke quickly smeared the letters, tossed his towel onto the ground, and stormed out of the bathroom. With the extra time, Luke went over his students' papers, watched the morning news, and then went back to grading. Fighting a pounding headache, he grabbed a couple of aspirin, poured himself a cup of coffee, and washed the tablets down. Enough time had passed, so Luke snagged his jacket off the back of the kitchen chair and grabbed a large satchel, a pile of papers, and his car keys, and charged out the back door into the bright light of the morning sun. With each brisk step he took, Luke's mood brightened as the warmth of the day burned off the troubling residue of his nightmare. Outside, away from the dark gloom of his memories, Luke's trouble seemed less burdensome, and it was easy to remember just how much he loved his job. Being a professor gave him purpose, bringing him joy when he was able to encourage, engage, and change the lives of his students for the better. Teaching for him was more than a career. It was his way of making a difference and investing in the lives of others that he hoped would be inspired to go on and do great things. After putting his things in the back of his Lexus sedan, Luke slipped into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and started off. Radio on, Luke listened to one of his favorite tunes before it was abruptly cut off by the broadcaster. The DJ's voice sorrowfully reminded her listeners of the special service being held today at the college before the start of the morning classes. Smile fading, Luke switched off the station and continued the drive in silence. The university used to be a sanctuary, but now, after the shooting, it felt more like a prison, a place where he was forced to go every week and do time for a crime he did not commit. Yes, he had saved the students in his classroom that day, but despite his best efforts, he had been unable to save Emily. Swallowing hard, Luke hated to admit that his own guilt had almost led him to take his own life not so long ago. And he would have succeeded too if that EMT hadn't gotten there when they did. Surviving the shooting had been great. Surviving the shooting had been a gift, one that Luke knew he should have been grateful for. But somehow, after everything, it had all become too much for him to handle. Slamming a hand against the steering wheel, Luke chided himself for how weak-minded he had become. He used to be strong, someone that others could count upon. But now he struggled to cope with the simplest of situations and found he was unable to deal with the demons plaguing him. Strange as it was, not being able to end his own life seemed to add to his guilt. Turning onto campus, Luke was filled with cold apprehension. How could he have done such a stupid thing? Even after months to think things through, he just couldn't wrap his mind around the thoughtless actions. Hadn't he told Emily time after time that she needed to live for all of those who had not been so lucky? Yet, after Emily's death and the unfathomable betrayal by the person he trusted most, the fragile walls of his logic gave way and crumbled. Luke's sad eyes scanned the beautiful desert landscape around the entrance. He wanted nothing more than to have his life return to normal, to feel a sense of regularity. But as he started his turn into the parking lot, he froze when he spotted over a dozen news reporters flanked by vans, cars, cameras, and all sorts of film equipment. Everyone was gathered about the concrete memorial. There was the never-ending reminder, brimming with fresh flowers, new pictures of the victims, and teary-eyed faculty, students, and family gathered around it. A horn blasted behind Luke, startling him. All eyes turned from the memorial at the sound, then settled upon him like a sledgehammer. Luke's heart sank as the students gave him a sad smile and raised a hand to him, motioning him over. Reluctantly, Luke took his foot off the brake and slowly guided his car into the parking spot. Grief had been a constant companion to him, at least since the loss of both of his parents in the car crash at 15. Heartache was the thing Luke knew how to handle. He had buried it and kept moving. But what he couldn't tolerate were the looks, the lingering pity of those people who would give him curt nods or pats on the shoulder with murmured words of appreciation for him taking bullets that might have otherwise found themselves in the sons or daughters who were fortunate enough to still be standing here today. Swallowing hard, Luke put the car in park, killed the engine, and steeled his resolve. Bracing for the onslaught of reporters, Luke stepped out of his vehicle without his bag or graded papers, choosing instead to walk into the mass of people that now surrounded his car. Struggling to close the door behind him, Luke was careful not to hit those closest to him. Fighting back the rising panic, Luke held up his hands as he wrestled his way toward the memorial among warring reporters who shouted over one another with various questions aimed at him. "Please show some respect for those who are here to honor their loved ones." Luke's tone was firm but gentle as he fought his way through the crowd. The last thing he needed today was for some rogue reporter to push him to lose his cool and go off on a rant that would make him appear even crazier than he currently felt. How was he supposed to stand here and listen to the prayers, the speeches about the young lives that were cut short, and worse still, the sobbing parents who would never see those same children graduate? Sweat beaded Luke's brow as he struggled to make his way toward the back of the crowd. He couldn't do this. He couldn't. Luke's steps faltered, causing him to stagger backwards into Zach, a huge junior football player. Zach took a protective stance between Luke and the reporters while also placing a firm hand upon his teacher's shoulder for support. "I've got your back, Professor," giving Luke a curt nod. Zach looked over his head and glared at the reporters. Intimidated, the flock of squawking correspondents backed down and gave Luke much-needed reprieve. Planting his feet, Luke readied himself to settle in as a soft whisper surrounded within the confines of his mind. "No peace. No peace. No peace." An involuntary shudder raced down his spine as he saw Emily, her body broken, bloodied, and horrifyingly disfigured, dragging her form through the throng of people to stand beside the monument. Thick, deep red blood dripped from her body and onto the beautiful white roses at her feet as Luke fought hard to curb his rising panic. Trying to swallow past the lump in his throat, Luke met Emily's sad expression as he shook his head in slow, jerky movements. "Please, not now, not here." Eyes sorrowful, Emily looked at Luke for a moment and then at the large crowd standing around her, all of them oblivious to her presence. Then Emily's gaze fixed on something, or more importantly, someone. Luke followed her gaze and found Rachel, Emily's sister, a student who had just begun her studies at the university this semester. Tissue in hand, Rachel dabbed at her eyes as she stood bravely next to her grieving parents, trying to be strong for them. Rachel looked up and spotted Luke staring at her and offered him a smile of reassurance. Luke tried to fight back the tears that formed in the corner of his eyes, but lost the battle as they escaped and made a path down his cheek. Angry at himself, Luke wiped them away and fought to regain his composure. Startled, Luke jerked upright when he felt Emily directly beside him. Zach's hand gripped his shoulder in support. Otherwise, Luke would have more than likely bolted and made a huge scene. "Emily, I'm begging you," Luke pleaded inside his mind. Zach leaned in. "The service is almost over. We can get through this, Professor." Ashamed, Luke offered Zach a half-hearted smile and nodded. He should have been the one comforting Zach and the other students, not the other way around. Unseen by Zach, Emily pressed in closer to Luke, and it took everything in him not to cringe as her ghostly lips inched toward his ear. "Ask Rachel again." Luke struggled to hear the speaker standing at the podium, but couldn't drown out Emily's soft whisper in his troubled mind. His eyes drifted back to Rachel as Emily leaned even closer. "Please keep asking until you get it." Trembling, Luke closed his eyes tight, wanting more than anything to slam both of his hands over his ears to drown out Emily's request. From what seemed like a mile away, Luke heard the speaker asking to close the ceremony with a word of prayer and he felt a wave of relief, knowing that this horrible part of the day was drawing to a close, and he could get on with this waking nightmare someplace else. Shaking Luke from his thoughts, Zach gave him a hard pat on the back. "See you in class, Mr. Bolton." Looking up into Zach's troubled face, Luke nodded. Yes, of course." Gathering himself, Luke offered his brave student a weak smile. "Thank you." Returning his smile, Zach started for a far building. "Anytime, Professor, anytime." Wasting no time, Luke made his way around the dispersing crowd towards his building, through 2 large metal doors, and weaved his way through the milling students toward his office. Looking down, something caught Luke's eye. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he shook his head and kneeled down to pick up a phone off the floor. Reaching for his office, Luke fumbled with his keys until the lock finally gave. Then he plunged into the sanctuary and shut the door behind him. Resting his head against the cool frame of the door, Luke drew in several shaky breaths. Pulse calming, Luke pushed away from the door and surveyed his once tidy office that now sat littered with stacks of papers, numerous books, and piles of unopened mail sitting on undusted shelves. Haggard, his frame a considerable amount lighter than it had been a year ago, Luke plopped down into his office chair and rested his head on his hands. A yelp sounded in the hallway outside Luke's closed doors, drawing his attention back to the entrance and onto the metal message board nailed to the wall beside it. On the board, spelled out in magnetized letters, was a to-do list of things he knew he needed to take care of, but as of yet had failed to do. His eyes scanned down the long list, focused on a set of misconstrued letters that were upside down. Luke cocked his head to the side, trying to make out the bunched up words, and felt his heart leap as he understood them. Izzy. Leaping from his chair, Luke stomped to the wall, raked the letters off the board, and sent them raining onto the ground. "I told you, not here. I mean it." Luke sucked in a quick breath, grabbed a book off the edge of his desk, and hurried out into the hall. Distracted, Luke barreled into Rex, an absent-minded student, sending them both careening backward. Luke reached out to steady Rex, who had stumbled backward into a door. "Rex, I'm so sorry." Rubbing his head, Rex laughed. "Totally my fault. Wasn't looking where I was going." Rex began picking up his scattered items. Luke helped him gather the mess. "Pretty sure I'm the one who ran into you." Looking up at the large clock above their head, Luke straightened and handed Rex a few things he had helped recover. "Better get to class. It's about to start." "Oh, right." Rex started past Luke, then skidded to a stop. "Oh, totally forgot. I was coming to find you." "And you have," Luke laughed. Bashful, Rex stuffed his books under his arms and looked up at Luke. "Wouldn't happen to have my phone, would you?" "Rex, what if I told you about losing your phone?" I know. I could have sworn I had it with me yesterday when I left your class, but I haven't been able to find it anywhere." With a sigh, Luke reached into his pocket and retrieved Rex's battered cell phone. "The janitor found it this morning and dropped it at my office." Luke offered the phone to Rex and smiled. "Take care of it this time, okay?" Snatching the phone from Luke, Rex held on to it protectively. "I will. I promise." "Okay, crap. Gotta go." Rex called back to Luke as he sprinted down the hall. "Thanks, Mr. Bolton." Luke watched as Rex, late again, skidded to a stop, then bolted into a far room. The young man was one of his favorite sophomores. Granted, Rex was a hot mess, but he was also an eternal optimist who worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for his education and never complained. Combining Rex's can-do attitude with the fact that he was also extremely bright, Luke knew that if his student could keep his act together long enough, the young man had a bright future ahead of him. Memories of another group of young adults flashed through Luke's mind, and his smile faded. The students he had spent the morning remembering had also felt that sweet promise, the exhilaration from their ambition and the burning hope of the future that Rex now experienced. Tragically, they would not be seeing their dreams come to fruition. Unable to shake his dark mood, Luke started down the hall toward his class. The room would no doubt be filled with impatient students awaiting their teacher, who was already late.